All right, good afternoon, everybody. Today we'll be covering a rapidly evolving domain of warfare, and that is the domain of irregular warfare. My name is Sawyer Hernandez. I'm joined by my co-moderator,
Blythe McQuaid.
And today's discussion will consist of a 35-minute questionnaire between us and our esteemed panelists who we will be introducing, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Please save all questions for the end.
Dr. Fabian is here in his own personal capacity. His views are his own and do not represent the views or policy of the U.S. government, the Department of War, or the Irregular Warfare Center. Dr. Sandor Fabian is a former Hungarian Special Force officer with 20 years of military experience. Dr. Fabian served in multiple national assignments, including the Senior Special Forces Desk Officer and Advisor to the Hungarian Chief of Defense, and held the Force Assignment and Evaluation Branch Head position at the Allied Special Operations Command, formerly known as NATO Special Operation Headquarters. Dr. Fabian is currently the Deputy Regional Advisor for Europe and Africa at the Department of Defense's Irregular Warfare Center.
Dr. Fabian is a graduate of the Hungarian Miklos Zrínyi National Defense University. He holds a master's degree in defense analysis, irregular warfare, from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, a graduate certificate in U.S. Intelligence Studies, and a PhD in security studies from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Fabian is the author of the seminal work, Irregular Warfare, The Future Military Strategies for Small States. It has contributed several articles at the Modern War Institute, the Irregular Warfare Institute, the Small Wars Journal, and the British Royal United Service Institute. He is joined today by his lovely fiancée, who we had the pleasure of having lunch with, Daniela, and congratulations. And we're so delighted to have both her and our panelists here today. Dr. Fabian's research interests include irregular warfare, Russian and Chinese approaches to conflict, U.S. foreign security assistance, and special operations.
Our first question for Dr. Fabian is, what initially motivated you to explore irregular warfare as a state-level strategy for small states, rather than only as a tactic or subset of conflict?
Thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, being invited to this very prestigious event. And you have to blame the organizers, because they came up with the idea to put the harsh-speaking Eastern European right after lunch and see if the audience can stay awake. And also they know me as someone who speaks very provocatively, controversially, hopefully invites a lot of debate and counter-arguments. And as I said, I use some harsh language. And again, I applaud Norwich University and the organizers of this event for their obvious way of forward thinking, which demonstrate an unbelievable value of this institution, the faculty and the supporting staff who is actually serving the student body here. And obviously, listening to your questions already to the other panelists, I am absolutely amazed by the talent and the intellectual power we have in this room. So to answer that question, actually I had 5 motivating factors to look at this topic. 3 of them were personal observations. One, obviously, as you heard, I spent 20 years in the Hungarian military, a former Warsaw Pact country that tried to transition from a large conventional military structure and enterprise into something meaningful, forward-looking, and future-focused national defense ecosystem. Well, that didn't work too well, because after 9/11, most Eastern European countries were pretty much very quickly aligned with the United States and started developing capabilities that were mostly serving the expeditionary capabilities needed for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And those capabilities arguably, and here is my first provocative point, were and still meaningless and irrelevant in a national defense settings, especially when it comes to kind of a conventional way of defense. So my observation, being in the military back in 2015 when I started working on this project or this topic, is most Eastern European small countries' militaries in a conventional sense or a traditional warfighting sense are irrelevant, incapable, and meaningless. The second is a historical observation that military organizations historically are or have been very good at learning from our enemies. And I would offer to you that we stop doing that. Because especially during the last couple of years, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, especially the Western militaries faced with an irregular enemy that was fighting small wars, military operations other than war. We came up with all these buzzwords, as the previous presenter talked about. And we said, this is not war, this is something else than war, and we don't have to be prepared for, and we don't really care what these guys are doing. My observation was, how about looking really deep into what the Iraqi insurgents are doing, how they organize, how they train, how they equip, what kind of tactics, procedures they are using. Same thing for the Taliban, same thing for the Hezbollah, same thing for Hamas, same thing for the Chechen insurgents in the Russo-Chechen wars, the same thing of the Mujahideen back in the Russo-Afghanistan war, and try to learn the lessons that might be applicable to state-level national defense institutions and organizations. And the third observation, that these actors were, like it or not, were very effective. Both in Iraq and Afghanistan, ad hoc organized, using, very simple technologies, organizational structures with no training or minimal training. They gave a very hard time to the largest, most modern, most advanced military organizations, the United States, the United Kingdom, and its Western allies. They gave a very hard time in those countries to us or for us. So I was wondering, what if a nation or a government decides to use the same organizations, the same techniques, procedures, and just develop them to the best possible ways and create forces that are equipped specifically for fighting such wars. The fourth factor in the topic was an individual with the name Dr. John Irregular, a professor at the US Naval Postgraduate School, who encouraged all of his students to think outside of the box, even without the box. I'm really sure you heard this, again, buzzword or expression quite a bit. And he said, take a look at the word and try to harvest from the edges of strategic thinking and military thinking. So I started reading into these kind of arguments and literature, and I identified that there are other views on warfare, prosecuting war, waging war, and approaching conflict than just the US or Western ways. The Chinese, as we heard, have potentially different views. The Russians developed different capabilities and approaches over the last decades. And then there are non-state actors out there that actually waging war against state actors, that they have their very unique approaches to conflict. And then in this research, the early research, I ran into this book called How the Weak Defeat the Strong, or How the Weak Win Wars. I'm paraphrasing the topic. And that book did a research and looked at weak versus strong actors in the last 200 years, analyzed the last 200 years, all the wars in the last 200 years, and made the argument that it's not the military might or capability between the two actors that ultimately decide who wins or who comes out of a conflict victoriously, but the interaction of the strategies that the actors are using. And it found that during the last 200 years, when a weaker side, a state or non-state actor, used an irregular or non-traditional strategy, aka not the kind of mainstream conventional warfare idea, against a state actor who used conventional military capability, 55% of the times the weak actor came out as the victor. So my initial argument was why small states or weaker actors are not developing capabilities and designing a military or national defense structure that is specifically designed for and focusing on waging irregular warfare against a military might or military capability or a larger state that is following a conventional military structure in general.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Sir, so we're talking about those capabilities, how the weak beat the strong. Could you go into the strategic advantages that specifically small states can achieve by employing those irregular warfare strategies, and maybe go into a little bit of what that irregular warfare looks like instead of a conventional military confrontation?
Okay, so again, the fundamental argument here is small states, conventional militaries are irrelevant and meaningless and incapable. Why am I saying that? It's pretty much capability and a capacity question. They don't have the numbers. When you look at, let's say, Estonia, or look at Hungary, I can say that because I'm not in uniform anymore. A country like that has maybe 40 tanks, right? If and 12 helicopters, and then maybe 12 fighter jets, and 300-400 fighting vehicles or armored personnel carriers. If you compare that to for example, a Russian military might in a Western military district, it's incomparable. It would take, and for example, in the Baltic states, after 2014, when the Russians annexed Crimea and started the conflict in eastern Ukraine, there were several simulations run by the RAND Corporation and the US DoD in the Baltic states that showed that within 48 to 60 hours, all three states would have been completely occupied, given their military capabilities against the Russian military capabilities in the Western military district. And NATO and the United States is not properly postured currently to actually effectively defend these countries. We can actually generate power and forces over 3 to 6 months, depending on strategic airlift and the sea logistics, and then obviously do a counterattack and try to reoccupy these countries. But there is no way to actually conventionally defend these countries. And these countries are still maintaining a conventional military. They have infantry battalions, a couple, maybe a single brigade, and that's pretty much it. Another thing that is an issue is there is no culture and history in smaller countries for joint combined maneuver warfare. That's an idea of pretty much the US military that, again, arguably they learned from the Wehrmacht from Second World War. There is no professional military education system developing leaders in these countries that could serve as effective leaders in these countries waging a conventional defense. There are no training areas with the size where you can maneuver anything larger than a company, maybe a battalion, in, a joint combined manner. So you are raising generations of military leaders, conventionally minded, educated, and trained military leaders who never really trained or exercised larger than a platoon formation. So you have generals, again, today who never seen a battalion, let alone a brigade, maneuvering and supported by fire and air and all that. And the other thing is, these countries are very small physically, right? There is no operational or strategic depth to fall back against a conventional attack. There is no way to actually mount a conventional defense against a large offensive capability like the Russians has, or in other cases, maybe the Chinese have in other areas or regions. So there is, in conventional warfare and in conventional military structure, there is no advantage, disadvantage for smaller states. So if they want to survive, and if they want to mount any kind of meaningful and potentially successful defense, then they need to rethink how they are going to prosecute a war against a much larger and technologically, arguably, more advanced conventional military. And the only logical answer to this is irregular strategy, because it gives them an opportunity to take away some of the advantages and capabilities of the conventional attackers' weapon systems. For example, if you say, we have long-range artillery, what do you need for long-range artillery to be effective? Targets, right? They have to shoot somebody. But if there is nobody to shoot because there are no conventional military formations, you just took away the advantage or even the meaningfulness of a long-range artillery capability. If you want to bomb something, but there is nothing to bomb, because there are no well-identified military infrastructure, that there are no battalions and brigades running around in the open battlefield, again, there is no advantage for the attacker and the conventional military capability. So I will stop there.
In your book, you distinguish between defense and deterrence, two concepts often used interchangeably. How do you define the difference, particularly for small states that cannot rely on large-scale conventional deterrence?
Yeah, for me, deterrence and defense is kind of a continuum on a range. And my argument here, especially in this project, was, what if deterrence fails? Because everybody says that deterrence is the key. We have to deter one way or the other the potential adversary to do something, right? But when it comes to the military, part of the military function is to prevent the adversary to attack or to conduct tests or whatever. So there is a posture, there's a capability and a capacity element to the deterrence part. But then you have to have the capability that if deterrence fails, that military capability that you developed has to prove itself in practice. And my argument was the current conventional structures and capabilities are not deterrent. Because again, if you just go out there, do a Google search, you look at Hungary, you look at Czech Republic, you look at any of the smaller countries, and obviously my argument and my kind of information is very spatial, focusing on Europe and my personal experiences and observations. But some of those countries have a brigade, okay? A simple brigade. And they have capabilities, they have air, they have artillery, but again, there is no adequate education and training system behind it. There is a huge problem with understanding the difference also between capability and capacity. They can do something. They can shoot an artillery round from here to here, but they cannot do it on a sustained manner for 30 days because there is no sustainment, there is no logistics behind it, not enough rounds, they cannot produce the rounds, and so on. So there is no real capability and capacity to be deterrent in a conventional sense. Now, if there is no deterrent, then I would argue when it comes to the situation when the deterrence fails and it goes into defense, that capability is even more and capacity is even more irrelevant and is not giving any real advantage to the small states. And a lot of counter-argument, but you have to have it because NATO is a large conventional structure, and I have many counterpoints to that, how NATO should be transformed as well in line with the changes mostly in the frontline states, and how NATO in this case should abandon interoperability and standardization and transform the whole structure and the whole concept to a defensive alliance, to a completely different kind of framework.
Sir, you talk about capability and capacity as a reason for deterrence not being an effective strategy. I'm interested in your opinion on how small states can integrate that information environment, gray zone operations, those expanding domains of cyber, disinformation, politics, within the irregular warfare structure, given the fact that you're correct, sir, they're very small, but they also may not have the resources to do so. These can oftentimes be robust strategies that require a lot of infrastructure. So is that augmented in your argument at all?
Well, not in the original one, but you are absolutely right. Those elements are critical, again, in the way we should think about conflict. Because right now, conflict and war, when we talk about war, and you can pretty much see this in the US education and training system for military leaders, it's about force on force, especially after Ukraine. We are going back to this large intensity, peer-on-peer conflict, and the vision is still division on division, brigade on brigade, tank battles, naval battles, huge air battles for air dominance and all that. Again, a small state cannot think like that. It has no relevance in that, and their militaries has no relevance in that. So they have to, first of all, have a vision how we want to defend in a conflict against a potential adversary. If they're lucky, they can kind of identify that adversary. So when you have the vision, like any conventional military structure, historically had a vision. What we did then, we built a framework, a conventional military framework, Army, Navy, Air Force, to that vision, right? And we built capabilities. We want to deliver fire, we want to gather intelligence, we want to push-pull logistics. So there are functions that serve that vision, that purpose of the structure. So small states, in my view and argument, they have to completely divorce from this traditional Western style, traditional warfare view, and come up with an idea of how they see themselves being defended or protected in case NATO is not coming, in case there is no bilateral agreement with somebody, in case nobody cares that you got invaded. They have to have a strategy for survival. And when you have that vision, you have to purpose-build an ecosystem on that vision. And my argument that on that vision, there is a kinetic element, a kinetic part, that would be my professional irregular defense force that is designed specifically to fight as insurgents, designed specifically, equipped, trained, supported logistically and everything as that kind of force. But the non-kinetic part is where the information operations, the cyber operations, targeted assassinations deep in the territory of the aggressor country. Spiderweb Operation Spiderweb was actually referenced this morning by the Lieutenant General, how the Ukrainians destroyed very deep in Russia strategic bombers. But those things cannot be developed after the conflict. Those things has to be purpose-built, equipped, trained. It has to be exercised. It has to be validated, and then they have to have that in place. And it has to have a narrative developed for the information space. It has to have the infrastructure to affect the information space, both within the small states, but arguably because we have a free internet and the information flow most of the time and in most regions are pretty free. You can pre-position information operations capabilities in other allied countries or third non-aligned countries. Cyber capabilities and all those have to be in this new design. But you can, my argument, and that's even the US and other conventionally focused militaries are making a mistake with it, that you cannot just load things into the same bucket and say, oh, this is a military function, this is a military function, this is a military function. You need a wider vision and a wider ecosystem around the very complex security environment that we are facing. And it has to be very specific for small states.
How can small states measure and preserve societal resilience and legitimacy to sustain prolonged irregular conflict, ensuring public trust, international support, and internal cohesion under asymmetric pressure?
That's the million-dollar question. Thank you very much. It's probably somebody could make a career on that. Yeah, again, resilience and especially societal resilience has become a very big buzzword very recently in NATO and Europe particularly. Same thing with resistance. It's quite funny. I wrote the book back in 2012, the initial manuscript, and then 2015 it was published. And when I spoke in any of this auditorium, probably 70% of the people was like, oh my God, the devil himself preaching like crazy stuff. And then as political pressure actually grew in Europe, and the Russians did Crimea, and the Russians started doing a couple other stuff, the Chinese started doing things, the discourse kind of shifted to 50-50. And then later, when we tried through the NATO Special Operation University to inject the idea of resistance, the same thing. You could not even mention the word. And a couple of years later, resistance became a thing in NATO, and also US Special Operation Command has been working with several European countries to actually develop resistance capabilities, which again in current form I'm highly critical of and argue it's a huge mistake because it's a waste of resources and dividing already scarce resources in multiple kind of lines of efforts, making all lines of efforts weaker than they would be if only one of them were actually pursued with the available resources and support. But we are living in a very, very complex security environment, and especially for smaller countries, when it comes to, again, to have any chance for survival or potentially defending against a much larger, again, technologically more advanced conventional aggressor, they have to have a very complex response. And one of that can be, and I'm not advocating anybody to get out of NATO. NATO is an amazing thing, and it's an extra addition for national security for any country. But is in case NATO is not coming, or NATO is not coming as fast as it should be, or as with the amount of capabilities and the amount of support that the country would have expected. Because as we heard earlier, everybody throws around Article 5, but Article 5 is a voluntary element. So although it says attack on one is attack on all of us, but it doesn't actually mandate and makes mandatory contribution from the countries. So they can provide, obviously, emotional support, like agreeing that you have the right to actually fight, and prayers and thoughts, and then other countries can provide, obviously, forces and logistics and so on. So in this complex environment, every country, and when I say that even the US, needs a societal involvement in addressing 21st century threat environment or threats against the country. And the foundation of societal involvement is resilience. And actually NATO has a definition of resilience, and again I'm butchering that probably, but it's the nation's ability to withstand or recover from a natural or man-made disaster or disaster pretty much. So it's critical, it's not just important, it's critical, and without societal level resilience as a foundation, as a bedrock, no small state countries' national defense have a chance for survival or any effectiveness.
I think it's clear through your last couple of answers that you may make the argument, or you do make the argument, that NATO is perhaps a bit myopic, at least in its conviction in using conventional military strategies. What I might add, or what I might ask you, is if the reason that NATO is myopic and the reason that small states need to change is because of the institutionalization of conventional warfare and our over-reliance on it, is there a risk to institutionalizing irregular warfare and creating those structures? And I might ask you to even throw in some historical examples, just because oftentimes, as we've seen in history with insurgents and partisans, the most effective irregular warfare campaigns have been reactive and developed during a moment of crisis with an external threat. Is there a risk to losing that dynamism that you see in successful irregular warfare campaigns by institutionalizing it?
Yes and no. That's always the best answer, right? As far as NATO, I think NATO is crucial. NATO is extremely important. I think just the Lieutenant General said this morning, the key word here is transformation. And NATO need to transform or transform the way it's doing business. And was mentioned this morning about this idea of forward defense. I think let's approach it from a conventional military perspective. When we are talking about defense, defense includes a line of defense, right? We have some stationary defensive positions and some mobile defense behind it to react to potential breakthroughs or encirclements and so on. That includes a lot of infrastructural preparation, minefields, tank ditches, barbed wires, all kinds of stuff. and then pre-positioning the forces and then training the forces specifically for that defensive warfare or prosecuting defense. Now it's not happening in NATO. So if we want really be a defensive organization and we say, the nations say, okay, we want to have the conventional framework sustained because it's just, politically unacceptable, the amount of time it would take to transition or transform from this current kind of Navy, Air Force, Army kind of system to something different is just too long, then I'm okay with that, but then you need to defend forward. You need to create fortresses and Maginot lines and defensive positions modernized to the 21st century requirement with UAVs, with other systems, with cyber capabilities, information operation capabilities in the frontline states. You need to have a crazy amount of money into infrastructural preparation. You have to pre-position forces. You have to redesign the entire command and force structure of NATO and pre-position them to the eastern flank. Plus, because NATO is thinking about, obviously, defense in 360, we have to address, the southern European nations' concerns with immigration and terrorist threats. So you have to, again, pre-position, you have to develop the appropriate approaches along the southern border as well. That's one way of doing it. So NATO has, in my mind, at least two different paths to go in the future, but both needs and requires a serious transformation of either how NATO is positioning, how it's organized, what that money, the 5% now that obviously most countries pledge to spend, how that money is going to be spent. It doesn't need more tanks, doesn't need more airplanes. It's not going to help with the overall concept. Or turning the Eastern European countries into a kind of irregular warfare-focused militaries, and then input or plug those into the system of NATO, kind of building, and the idea is there, to building porcupines, as some literature would say, along the eastern border, and then Germany, France, the UK, and the US would bring in the big military might again to support these porcupines. But those porcupines are not being developed the way they are supposed to, because the smaller countries just cannot or are not willing to give up completely the conventional mindset and the idea of I need infantry brigade, I need a helicopter wing, and I need artillery brigade or whatever. And what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
The risk of...
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. As there is a risk maintaining a meaningless conventional military capability, there is a huge risk of building something like that, because some societies are just not going to. It's not going to go well. Italians, they built similar capabilities and they turned into mafia and organized crimes. They took some of the training they received and turned it into money-making criminal activities. So there are a lot of risk. Again, it has to be thought out in very much details. You have to understand your societal dynamics and the structure to see what is. The risk is definitely there. But again, ultimately what we are talking about is survival, potential survival. And the chance you might have, which approach you have a better chance if you stay alone or if you want to survive.
I think it's time to move to Q&A. Yeah, sure.
Our last question will be, what should small states prioritize in the next decade to remain strategically relevant through irregular means?
I don't think small states are strategically relevant, first of all. Second of all, some of them could be because, let's be honest, if there is a conflict with Russia or China or anybody else, that conflict is going to happen on the soil of some of the small states or some of the borderline countries in Asia or Europe or you name it. So their strategic value is that they are going to be the battlefield, right? So that there is what I think again, small states have to have an understanding and a vision. If there is a conflict, and many people, especially in Europe, would argue that conflict is coming. It's not a question of if, but when. That's another thing we can discuss probably for a couple hours. But let's say the assumption is that conflict is coming. Then what they have to prioritize is have a vision how that conflict is going to happen, not from Second World War, not from Ukraine, because Ukraine is a very unique case. And everybody's dancing around the idea of, learn the lesson from Ukraine. That's the future of warfare. Ukraine is a very unique land, a very unique society, a very unique military capability, a very unique geopolitical player, and so there are a lot of things there. But the small states have to have a vision how they want to prosecute that conflict that is apparently coming. They have to, again, organize, train, equip for that conflict. And I argue that they have to do a lot of infrastructural preparation in support of that vision. What I mean by that is turning the cities and the urban areas into pretty much military fortresses, because the battlefield of the future is going to be urban areas. Urban areas are already kind of pre-designed a little bit to support military operations if you use an irregular formation there, and it's also designed to limit, or in many cases completely make commercial military weapon systems, intelligence gathering systems, and so on, their capabilities irrelevant or significantly reduced. So if that's already the case in any built-up area, if you put in money and efforts to actually turn them into even a more difficult terrain, even a more restricting terrain for commercial and military capabilities, not just fire capabilities, but many other capabilities, that I think is a crucial priority for smaller states.
All right, at this time, we're going to move into our 15-minute Q&A. I'd like to orient you guys to the left and right microphones on either side of the stairwell. If you guys want to line up and ask questions, now's the time.
Hi, thanks for a fascinating talk. I'm a researcher in the tech industry, so I'm not actually affiliated. I guess I have a two-part question. Since you did say that essentially the book was released in 2015, could you just give maybe a brief evaluation of how well you feel Ukraine has made this transformation? But then also I'd love to hear how you would update the book in light of the experience of Ukraine, sort of some self-evaluation of the central thesis as well. Thank you.
So a couple of things on that. Thank you very much for that question. So obviously the US and many European allies, especially the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, have been a very big supporters of Ukrainian capability and capacity development after 2014. And one of the capabilities that these countries helped the Ukrainians to build is their resistance capability, which is resistance means pretty much activities behind enemy lines where the Russians occupied or the Ukrainians expected that the Russians are going to occupy territories. They had stay-behind forces, military or half-military, paramilitary forces who were conducting different activities, kinetic activities, killing Russians, gathering informations, providing logistics, evacuating people from behind enemy lines, and so on. So the Ukrainians had a lot of success in capability development, and to the point where they, I think, just 3 or 6 months before the actual invasion, they passed a national resistance law that made it mandatory to every Ukrainian citizens to resist and be part of the resistance. Unfortunately, that law was a little bit too late because everything that was included in the law could not be implemented because of the time. But they have been quite successful. My issue with that is, and that's my hand was in it, so it's a self-critique as well, that the resistance capability development was done by the so-called resistance operating concept. That is a report document that was developed by the Swedish Defense University and the United States Special Operations Command Europe. And it's a fine theoretical work that focused on the European examples of resistance during Second World War. So all the lessons and best practices and everything was pretty much drawn from the Polish resistance, the underground state, and the history of the Polish resistance and the French resistance mostly. So none of the relevant and most contemporary cases, like again the Taliban, the Iraqi insurgents, the Hamas, Hezbollah, the Syrian resistance, none of the organizational structures, tactics, techniques, procedures, logistics, none of that was included in this theoretical framework. So we created in Ukraine an organization that was kind of the idea of in support of conventional military capabilities. So long story short, it could have been done way better with probably more and better strategic effect, but I think they did and still have been doing quite well for the purpose that they were designed for, aka to support conventional military activities, and here or there deliver some strategic effect for the Ukrainian government by showing activities behind enemy lines and helping the Ukrainian government to marshal international support. What was the second part? I'm sorry.
No, I think you answered it, which was also just how would you update
the book? Yeah. So I have 6 case studies in the book, and probably you will not be surprised. I would add the Iraqi insurgency, I would add the Taliban, and then the Syrian insurgency as case studies to show, because I go from the US Revolutionary War and I end with the second Israeli-Lebanese war, using the Chechens and also the early Taliban. But I think there are more contemporary cases. We just don't like to admit how difficult these were for us, and I think we have to study them to the detail and then seriously see how we can implement some of the best practices from these organizations into our military structures.
Thank you. And just to clarify, that document that you mentioned that kind of outlined irregular forces about, in the anticipation of support of conventional arms, do you think that's still appropriate for NATO, since presumably that is what would occur, and it just didn't apply to Ukraine because there haven't been that support, or do you think the whole thing needs to be sort of...
I can tell you that NATO right now has a comprehensive defense handbook that is pretty much it's a NATO version of the resistance operating concept, and that is being taught in NATO schools, NATO Special Operation University, as the framework of a national comprehensive defense. And resistance is named in there as either a supporting or a supported effort, but because we are talking in a NATO framework, is always a supporting effort. So NATO expects countries to develop resistance capabilities that would support a NATO counterattack.
Okay, and you think that's appropriate, or you think they need to go farther?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much.
You have to turn it on. Or not.
Yeah, or I can just be loud too.
Okay.
That works. Thank you again for being here, sir. My question orients around the central thesis of your book, looking at how irregular warfare serves as almost a force multiplier for smaller states against conventionally armed larger states. As we watch large states orient more towards irregular warfare tactics, whether they be kinetic or non-kinetic, how do you see small states sort of evolving irregular warfare to maintain that edge, to stay ahead in this fight?
So my major argument is I think that's a mistake translating it as a force multiplier. In my idea, that's the only force. The issue with the idea of force multipliers, that's a great thing for the United States of America with its might, with its resources and societal structure. In a country of 1.2 million, you cannot maintain a conventional military and then an irregular military structure given your human and financial resources. I always, when I have this argument or debate with somebody, I always compare it, knowing that we did the same thing in Hungary, for example. That, the military in many countries look like a body that is pretty much brain dead, and it's only maintained by some of the life support, IVs and things like that. And when you add an irregular warfare capability next to it, you create another brain dead body who shares the same IV with the already brain-dead body, which is the conventional military. You are losing any effectiveness, capability, capacity by dividing scarce resources into two entities that are just unable to exist. So I think irregular warfare, and again, professionally built, designed, trained, equipped, supported, exercised irregular force is the only way for national or small militaries to have any, or small countries to have any meaningful capability.
What I mean is, as larger states, you can support both the conventional and the unconventional, the regular and the irregular. How do you see smaller states evolving their irregular forces to keep up with that, to stay ahead?
Well, that's something I definitely have to think about. You know, you have to keep up with the technology, but do not be, another thing of mine is do not become slave to the technology. And I think tonight when we will have the unconventional leadership panel, I will make a couple points on that as well, because sometimes technology is actually a big, not force multiplier, but it's hindrance on capability, adaptability, and what you can do. Keep up with the technology, but again, also purpose-built and purpose-designed capabilities. And you have to create the environment around that irregular capability, and that's why I'm a big advocate for infrastructural preparation. You know, if you want to fight a certain way, if you want to play soccer, you need a soccer field, right? You want to build a soccer field, and you also want to have a shower room and a changing room, and so on. And those are purpose-built for soccer. You can play American football in that facility, but it's not going to be the same effect, or you know, it's not going to deliver the same outcome. But let me think about it and discuss it later.
All right, you spoke earlier about the balance between an irregular warfare combining kinetic and non-kinetic action. With the evolution of things like the cyberspace and all of this wrapping into warfare, how do you see that balance in the future of warfare? Will it be heavily non-kinetic, or do you think that kinetic element will still triumph over the non-kinetic?
I don't think there is or supposed to be a balance. Very recently, so first of all, I did some Marine Corps school, and I really love, and I'm sorry for the Army guys and the Navy and Air Force guys, I really love MCDP1, Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, titled War Fighting. And it started with the sentence of, war is a clash of human wills. So again, how we think about war is, again, Clausewitz, the continuation of politics with other means, right? There is a political end. There is... That's our time? We were. It's a political end. So war is not always going to be kinetic on kinetic force. And very recently, I wrote an article for West Point where I argued that, you know, when we are talking about war, potential war with China, Indo-PACOM and all these guys are simulating and wargaming how it's going to unfold in the Indo-Pacific region, but nobody talks about how it's going to affect the American society and population, what is going to happen here. A lot of activity in the cyberspace, a lot of activity in the information domain, a lot of activity in the agricultural domain, a lot of activity in the political, social, religious, division and societal problems. There are so many other elements to war. So there's no balance. It depends on how the adversary is envisioning achieving that overarching political goal.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, that is our time. Dr. Fabian will be doing follow-up panel. I don't know what time it is. Is it?
I think it's 6.
7.
7.
Unconventional warfare?
It's going to be unconventional leadership.
Unconventional leadership. So please come tonight, and thank you all for your great questions, and we hope you enjoyed. Can we get a round of applause?
Thank you very much. You were great, thank you. Next time, don't shake, it's okay.